While my sister Vivian was collecting degrees from Rutherford Law School and accepting job offers from prestigious firms, I was teaching 5-year-olds how to draw rainbows with their fingers. Last week, at her graduation party, my parents handed Vivian the keys to a BMW and the deed to a $15 million penthouse in Eldridge Tower, in front of 250 guests. They called her the only Whitmore success story, and I stood in the background, like a shadow, invisible as always. Until a strange man in a charcoal suit stepped forward, holding an envelope. "Your grandfather knows the truth," he whispered. Little did I know, what happened next would leave my entire family speechless. Before I tell you everything, if you believe that true value is not measured in money, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is, because I actually read every comment. Now, let me tell you about a piece of paper that changed everything. The Whitmore's penthouse apartment overlooked Crescent Park from the 72nd floor. Every morning, I'd find my parents, Richard and Eleanor, sipping coffee from Ardor crystal cups, discussing Vivian's bright future at the walnut dining table. The original Monvel hung over the fireplace, a painting worth more than I could have earned in 18 years teaching public school art. And I lived in a small apartment in Northfield with a water-stained ceiling and a fireplace that crackled at night. While Vivian wore Celeste bags that cost more than my annual rent, I carried only an old canvas bag, one I'd painted myself in college. The contrast wasn't subtle, and my parents made sure everyone knew it. "Clara teaches at Lincoln Elementary," my mother would say to her friends in the Westbridge Club, her voice low, as if she were making an embarrassing confession. "And Vivian just became a lawyer at Barrow and Hunt." Comparisons in my house always came in pairs, like salt and pepper, except one was expensive, Himalayan pink salt, the other, just plain sea salt. But there was one thing they never knew. I loved my job. Every morning, 25 third graders came running up to me for a hug. Their faces lit up when they saw the paint cans, the brushes, the things I bought with my own meager salary. Their parents, immigrants, single mothers, fathers working 3 jobs, bowed their heads and thanked me with tears in their eyes when their children brought home paintings that made them feel seen. My parents never asked about my class. They didn't know about the awards that filled my desk, the thank you notes that said I changed a child's life. To them, success was rising stocks. It was summer homes on Seabrook Estate. And yet, I still go to every dinner, every family party, not because of them, but because of Grandpa Arthur, the only person who ever said to me, "Clara, you will change the world, just not in the way they think." I didn't understand what he meant then, until last week, the day Vivian Whitmore graduated from summa cum laude from the famous Rutherford Law School. The Dean of Rutherford personally shook Vivian's hand, and Barrow and Hunt offered her a starting salary of $215,000, even before her cap dropped. On her wrist, the Valmont watch, a graduation gift from her father, was worth more than my annual salary of $42,000. She was 28, 4 years younger than me, and already had a portfolio that would make many CEOs jealous. Vivian's LinkedIn page read like a modern-day fairy tale: graduated with honors from Rutherford Law School, Rutherford Law degree, summer associate at 3 Fortune 500 companies, 2 research papers published in the Rutherford Law Journal. And my profile just read, art teacher at Lincoln Elementary, believes every child is an artist. That week, my family group chat turned into a shrine to Vivian's glory. Photos of her in her cap and gown, screenshots of congratulatory messages from senators and CEOs, a video of her giving her valedictorian speech. My message simply read, "Congratulations, Vivian," and in response, a heart emoji. Nothing more. What that conversation never revealed were the 8 National Education Awards that sat quietly in my desk drawer, the Teacher of the Year award I'd won 3 times. The art therapy program I'd built from scratch, now serving over 500 children with disabilities in 3 different counties. I'd never told anyone in my family, because by our family's standards, it was worthless. The invitation to Vivian's graduation was printed on paper thick enough to be used as a weapon. Silver lettering gleamed in the subject line. in celebration of the extraordinary achievement of Vivian Whitmore. And underneath, my mother's handwriting, Clara, dress appropriately. I picked out the best dress I had, a simple black dress from a discount store. Vivian, of course, wore a $700 custom-made Avenoir dress. Some things never seem to change. And I have asked myself, countless times in my life, why can't I be like Vivian? That question followed me throughout my childhood like a persistent shadow, always ready to shatter the fragile faith I had left. When I brought home an A- in calculus, Vivian skipped 2 grades. When I won the State Art Award at 16, Vivian was accepted to Rutherford Law School at 17. All my accomplishments were mere footnotes in her larger story. Vivian Whitmore, future Supreme Court Justice, as my father liked to announce after his 3rd whiskey. My mother perfected the art of selective introductions. "This is Vivian, our Rutherford Law School law student." She would smile brightly, the diamonds on her wrist catching the light. Then, if anyone asked, she would add reluctantly, "And this is Clara. She teaches." The pause after teaching was always long, as if to fill the void called disappointment. I chose teaching because of Mr. Yamamoto, my high school art teacher who found me crying in my locker after hearing yet another comparison. He said, "Some people build skyscrapers, Clara. Others build souls. Guess which one lasts longer?" I chose souls. My parents wanted me to build a portfolio, and the wall of family photos in the living room told the story better than any words. One side was filled with frames of Vivian in her graduation gown, and the other side, just a small picture of me, standing among children, finger-painting the sky. Vivian Whitmore's wall of honors took up a large portion of the living room. Honorary diplomas, carefully collaged newspaper clippings, photos with governors and judges. My section was pitifully small, with only one photo, my Northfield State graduation. Even that was half obscured by Vivian's acceptance letter to Rutherford Law School, framed in gold by my mother, Eleanor, in the center of the wall of fame. 10 years of therapy had taught me not to seek their approval, but knowing it intellectually and feeling it in my bones were 2 different things. So I continued to show up to every party, still smiling, still pretending that their words didn't hurt. But deep down, I knew. Every glance, every comparison was like a tiny cut, carved into my heart. That evening, from the corner of Easton Hall's ornate ballroom, I saw a man in a charcoal suit. He had been there since I entered, his eyes calm, as if observing, waiting for something. The room glowed with the expensive light of crystal and glitter, a light of wealth that needed no words to proclaim, for it permeated every breath of those present. 250 guests sipped Dom Perignon from Ardor crystal glasses, while beluga caviar was served on gleaming silver platters, each platter probably costing more than my old car. Every corner of the room exuded opulence, the 30-foot-high white silk ceilings, the vases of pure white orchids flown in from Thailand that morning, the crystal light reflecting off each tailored smile. My father, Richard Whitmore, stood in the center of the room, holding a champagne flute and the gold-plated pen he had always considered a symbol of power. When he tapped his glass, the crystal sound silenced the room, leaving only the distant sound of classical music. He smiled smugly and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here tonight to celebrate the Whitmore family's only success story." He raised his glass to Vivian, who stood in the spotlight in her custom-made Avenoir gown, looking as if she were carved from marble and ambition. "My daughter," he said, "is a graduate of Rutherford Law School, the only success story, and the only one." In that moment, I realized I was no longer even a footnote in their story. I was the blank space, the unmentioned extra. Meanwhile, my mother, Eleanor, glided around the room, her voice accompanied by the classical quartet, continuing to paint the perfect scene for the evening, with all the spotlights on one person, Vivian Whitmore. Vivian was talking proudly to the mayor's wife, her voice clear over the classical music. "I'm starting at Henderson and Vale next month," she said, her eyes sparkling like the diamonds on her wrists. People around her applauded, complimented, raised their glasses. Then she turned and saw me, standing at the shrimp display, trying to avoid the light. "Oh, that's Clara," she said, her voice sweet but with a knife in her voice. "She teaches finger painting to kids." The way she emphasized the word finger painting made me feel like I'd just been accused of selling illegal goods to children. A woman in a Chanel dress turned to me with a polite smile. "What grade do you teach?" Before I could answer, my mother, Eleanor, interrupted. Her voice soft but enough to bury me in contempt. "Primary school, very elementary." The woman's smile turned to pity. "It's a blessing that you still find something to do," she said, then turned away as if to give me some comfort from above. The phone in my pocket vibrated. An unfamiliar number. A text message appeared. "Don't leave early tonight. Your grandfather left you more than memories." I looked up, my heart pounding. In the dimly lit room, I saw the man in the charcoal suit. The same look, calm, observing, as if he knew something no one else did. He lifted his champagne glass slightly toward me, a small gesture, but I sensed it. Everything was about to change. My father, Richard Whitmore, returned to the microphone, an excited smile on his face. "And now," he said, his voice echoing throughout the ornate ballroom, "is the real surprise of the evening." He turned to Vivian, his eyes shining with pride. "Success deserves to be rewarded." He pulled a dark blue velvet box from his vest pocket, and the room leaned forward in anticipation. When he opened the lid, the light from the crystal chandelier reflected off the Tesla Model S plaid key fob, making it sparkle like a diamond. "This car," he said, "is for my 28-year-old daughter, who has made this family prouder than ever." The crowd roared, and some actually applauded, the applause echoing through the golden space. A $130,000 Tesla, a gift for someone who already had everything, including a brand new BMW parked outside. Vivian walked onto the stage, her every move carefully calculated. She flashed a perfect smile, a smile that had been honed over the years to convey the humility of a winner. "Thank you, Dad," she said, holding up the keys as if she were lifting a trophy. "And yes, my parents even hired a professional photographer to capture this moment. He's shooting from every angle." But as the camera flashes continued, my mother, Eleanor, stepped onto the stage, her smile so bright it was almost theatrical. "But that," she said, holding a large ivory envelope, "isn't all." The room held its breath, and I knew the next blow would be even harder. My mother, Eleanor, pulled out a luxurious cream-colored envelope with a shimmering gold border from her Hermes Birkin bag, the one that cost me a year's salary. She smiled, her voice honeyed with pride. "Inside this envelope," she said, "are the deeds to your new penthouse in Tribeca. 4 bedrooms, private terrace, panoramic views of the city you're about to conquer. 15 million. I heard every word, every number. A silly analogy flashed through my mind. That amount of money could fund my school's entire art program for the next century. It could help thousands of kids get access to art therapy, kids whose names, faces, and dreams I knew. Instead, it became just another gift for someone who already had everything. Vivian hugged my parents, her smile so bright it was almost blinding under the crystal chandeliers. The professional photographer they hired ran around the stage, capturing every angle, every hug, every smile. The room erupted in applause, claps that sounded like tiny hammers pounding against the inside of my head. I stood in the corner, invisible as the old wallpaper, clutching my champagne glass so tightly I feared it might shatter at any moment. On stage, my father, Richard Whitmore, raised the microphone again, his voice echoing through the room. "The Tesla is just the beginning of all you deserve, Vivian." The applause rang out again, and I knew once again that I did not belong here. The man in the charcoal suit began to move, not indistinctly, not hurriedly, just a deliberate movement through the glittering crowd. Everyone was looking at the stage, at Vivian, at her victory, but not him. His gaze pierced the layers of light and stopped where I stood. My phone buzzed again. Another text from an unknown number. "The real show starts in 5 minutes. Don't sign anything." I frowned. Sign what? I didn't even understand what was going on. But before I could think any further, my mother, Eleanor's voice rang out, cold and sharp as a small knife. "Clara, come here, please. They're calling you up on stage." I looked up, and Vivian was holding the microphone, like a queen's scepter, her Rutherford Law School ring gleaming in the light. She smiled, her voice sweet, practiced perfectly over hundreds of speeches. "First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out to celebrate with our family tonight." She paused, her eyes scanning the room, and then settling on me. "Success isn't easy," she continued, her voice growing more meaningful. "It requires dedication, ambition, and the courage to pursue more than others think is enough." A brief pause. Then she tilted her head, her smile fading, her eyes shining with arrogance. "Of course, some people are content to finger paint and enter a few small competitions." The room fell silent. Then there was a small laugh. Not a good laugh, but the kind of laughter that comes from people trying to be polite when they see someone being put down. I heard someone whisper behind me, "Pretty harsh." Another replied, "But she's right." And in the middle of that light-filled room, I stood there, silently exposed. Vivian continued, her voice steady and sweet, a practiced sweetness, not one born of kindness. "Some people," she said, "are content with mediocrity. They find solace in small lives, small dreams, small paychecks. And that's okay. The world still needs people teaching children the alphabet," she paused, smiling, "while the rest of us prepare to argue in front of the Supreme Court." The room erupted in soft laughter, the kind that had a taste of superiority. My cheeks burned. I felt 250 eyes trying not to see me, but seeing them all. A woman wearing a pearl necklace bowed her head and whispered to her husband, "Is that the teacher?" The man replied softly, "Poor her." I stood still, trying to steady my breathing, but my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. On stage, Vivian raised her glass of champagne, the crystal reflecting off her perfect face. "Tonight," she declared, "is not about people who settle. Tonight is about excellence. It's about proving that, with the right mindset, the right education, and the right priorities, any of us can achieve what we want." The applause broke out again. Massive, warm, fake. And I just stood there, living proof of what they considered mediocre. As Vivian was basking in the glow of admiration, the man in the charcoal suit stepped forward. No one called out to him, but the crowd parted automatically, as if he carried some invisible power that everyone felt. He was older than I thought, maybe 75. His silver hair was trimmed, his walk slow but steady. His eyes were deep and bright, the kind of gaze of someone who has witnessed a lifetime of secrets hidden in silence. When he spoke, the room fell silent. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, his voice soft but resonant, deep and steady. "My name is Henry Callahan. I was your grandfather's lawyer, Mr. Walter Whitmore. I served him for 40 years. My father, Richard, paled instantly. My mother, who was holding a glass of champagne, shook her hand. The pale gold liquid spilled a little, spilling onto the marble floor. Henry continued to walk onto the stage, each step thickening the atmosphere. He stopped in the middle of the spotlight, gently pulling out from his jacket a dark brown leather envelope, old but well kept. "I have something to take care of tonight," he said, his eyes scanning the room, and then stopping on me. And somehow I knew this night would be like no other. Before another word could be said, Vivian Whitmore's smile froze. Henry Callahan, the man in the charcoal suit, inclined his head slightly, his voice low and firm. "I don't think this is the right time, but, actually, your grandfather insisted that it be now." My father, Richard, recovered immediately. He always did that whenever he felt his authority was being challenged. He took a step forward, his voice cold and commanding. "Mr. Callahan, this is a private family gathering. If there is anything to discuss, please wait until—" "When it's too late?" Henry interrupted, his voice still calm, but now with a cold weight underneath. "I'm afraid That's no longer an option. The air in the room became thick. I saw my father's jaw tighten, a vein bulging at his temple. He knew. And somehow my mother, Eleanor, knew too. They looked at each other, a look that lasted too long, heavy, as if it contained a secret that had been kept for years. Before Henry could say more, my father rushed back to the microphone, his voice faster, more urgent, as if trying to stifle the shifting air. And by the way, he said, I am pleased to announce that Vivian will also be the heir to the entire Whitmore family fortune. The room exploded with applause and congratulations. The company, the estate, everything, he continued, a forced smile tugging at his lips. She has proven herself to be an excellent asset manager. Vivian beamed. The light fell on her face, reflecting off the champagne glass she held aloft. My mother, Eleanor, smiled so brightly that the Botox on her forehead nearly cracked. But amidst all the cheering, all I saw was Henry Callahan, still standing in the middle of the crowd, his eyes never leaving mine. And I knew something terrible was about to come to light. As for Clara, my father, Richard Whitmore, continued, and I felt my stomach drop, as if someone had just sucked all the air out of the room. She, of course, he continued, his voice smooth, is not capable of such great responsibilities. I suppose teaching children to finger paint is noble, but it's hard to see it as proof of being able to manage a multi-million-dollar estate. He paused, glanced around the crowd, then smiled with his usual confidence. Some people, he said, build empires, and others, finger paint. Each word fell like a physical blow, so cold and heavy that it made the air around me feel stuffy. My mother, Eleanor, stepped forward immediately, as if they had rehearsed this scenario. Of course, she said softly, pulling a neatly clipped sheaf of papers from her Hermes Birkin. We need Clara to sign this renunciation. It's just a formality, honey, and it's best for everyone. The room was dead silent. Even for Upper Easton society, this moment was dramatic. Come on, Clara, my father said, not as an invitation, but as a command. I stepped onto the stage, my legs as soft as water, feeling 250 eyes on my every move. I heard a murmur from the crowd. The woman in the Chanel dress whispered to her friend, family business. It's awkward. Another replied, she should know her place. My mother handed me the paper and a Mont Blanc pen, her voice eerily gentle. Just sign, dear. Don't make things any harder than they need to be. I stood still. Then, in the thick air, Henry Callahan stepped onto the stage. His face calm, but his eyes sharp as a knife ready to cut through a lie. I really must ask you to stop, my father, Richard Whitmore, snapped, his voice echoing throughout the room. You have no authority here. Henry Callahan didn't back down. He just smiled, not a kind smile. Oh, but I'm afraid you're wrong, Richard, he said, his voice coldly calm. Your father wouldn't approve. And since he's the one who really built this empire, the empire you're so eager to redistribute as you see fit, then I think his opinion matters. My hand shook. The Mont Blanc pen in my hand suddenly felt heavy, as if it were pulling me down with the weight of this family history. The entire room, 250 people, held its breath in anticipation. Vivian's smile was as hard as marble, sharp enough to cut glass. The release was placed on the podium, the legalese blurring before my eyes through the tears that refused to fall. Sign it, Clara, my mother Eleanor hissed, her voice too low for the microphone to pick up, but loud enough for me to hear. Just this once, do the right thing. The right thing, for them. Which meant disappearing. Which meant erasing myself from this story forever. On stage, Vivian leaned into the microphone, her voice sweet, too perfect to be fake. Sister, this is for everyone. I know, you can't handle this. Remember when you cried about not being able to pay your college loans? A soft laugh rang out from somewhere in the crowd. It was soft, polite, but enough to make me feel naked in the light-filled room. And in that moment, I realized, this is no longer a party. This is a court of law, and I am the defendant. My hand trembled as I moved toward the signature line, where Clara Whitmore's name was written. Everything around me seemed to blur. The music, the voices, even my breathing, except for the pounding of my heart in my ears. And then, Henry Callahan's voice rang out, clear and sharp as a knife. Before you sign, Clara, there is something you need to know. My father, Richard, stepped forward immediately between me and Henry, his voice harsh. Mr. Callahan, you are violating the security of this place. I demand that you leave immediately. Henry did not back down. He looked straight at my father, his voice louder, stronger, no longer gentle. I am here as the executor of the will of Walter Whitmore, her grandfather. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the room. And the legal administrator of the estate you two have deliberately kept hidden for the past 10 years. The Easton Hall ballroom fell so silent that I could hear my mother Eleanor clinking her pearls as she trembled. That's impossible, my father said, but his voice broke at the end of the sentence. My father's will was very simple. Everything belongs to me. The will you submitted, Richard, is very simple indeed, Henry replied, his eyes cold. But it's not the real one. A ripple of excitement spread through the room. Henry opened the dark brown leather envelope he had brought with him and pulled out a thick document. The distinctive gold seal of the state of New York gleamed in the crystal chandelier. He held the file up high, his voice ringing with judgment. This is the real will, kept in 3 separate safes, along with Walter Whitmore's video testimony and 5 legal witnesses. No one said a word. I looked at my parents, and in their panicked eyes, I knew Henry wasn't lying. There's something everyone here needs to see, Henry Callahan announced, his voice echoing in the hushed room. Something that will change the meaning of this evening. Vivian was instantly alarmed. She turned to me, her voice urgent. Just sign it, Clara. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Don't make our evening any more chaotic. But my hand had stopped moving. Because in Henry Callahan's eyes, I saw my grandfather Walter Whitmore again. His eyes were kind, deep, and sure. The eyes of the man who had once said to me, "You will change the world, just not in the way they expect." I swallowed, looked down at the Mont Blanc pen in my hand, then looked around the room where 250 faces were looking at me. Some curious, some mocking, and some terrified. Henry nodded slightly and said quietly, "It's time, Clara. If you've ever felt undervalued, simply because you chose purpose over profit, you'll understand this moment. And if you believe that quiet justice and the power of patience can change everything, stay. Because what happens next will forever change how you see success." I gripped the pen, my breath coming in short gasps. Then, in the blinding crystal light, I put the pen down and waited for the truth to be revealed. Vivian stood tall, radiant and confident, as if she were on a podium accepting an award. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, looked at her with pride, mixed with impatience with me. The room was silent, waiting for the ordinary teacher to accept her place at the bottom of the Whitmore family hierarchy. For a moment I almost signed. 15 years of being considered a disappointment, weighed down on my shoulders like a leaden blanket. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was meant to do small things. Maybe my dreams were small too. And maybe teaching kids to draw rainbows wasn't worth the cost of arguing billion-dollar deals. I lifted my head, looking around the splendid room. The chandeliers glittered, reflecting off expectant faces. A sentence escaped my lips, as soft as a breath but loud enough for the microphone to pick up clearly. Sometimes, loving your family means letting go. My mother smiled. Vivian beamed. My father nodded in approval. I bent down, the Mont Blanc shaking in my hand, the tip of the pen touching the signature Clara Whitmore. Just one stroke, I thought, and I would never hear another comparison again. No more family dinners where my work was considered a hobby. No more questions about why I couldn't be more like Vivian. And in that moment, Henry Callahan's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Your grandfather wrote to you, Clara." The pen froze in my hand. Henry continued, his voice slow and clear. 23 letters, over the course of 10 years. And your parents returned them all, unopened. The room fell silent. I heard someone drop a champagne glass. And in that moment, everything I had ever believed about my family began to crumble. Vivian stood on stage, radiant and confident, as if she were the center of the universe. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, looked at her with pride, while their eyes on me were one of impatience. The room was silent, waiting for the mediocre teacher to accept her place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. For a moment, I almost signed, 15 years of being considered a failure weighed on my shoulders like a leaden blanket. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was meant to do small things, teach children to draw rainbows, not argue in court. I said softly, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. Sometimes, loving your family means letting go. My mother smiled. Vivian nodded. My father was pleased. I bent down, the tip of the Mont Blanc pen touching the words Clara Whitmore. Just one more stroke, and I would be out of this story forever. But then Henry Callahan spoke, his voice booming. Your grandfather wrote you 23 letters, and your parents returned them all, unopened. The room held its breath, and I knew everything was about to change. My hand froze. What letter? I looked at my parents. My mother was pale, and my father looked like he had lost control. Henry Callahan opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of yellowed envelopes. Walter Whitmore spent his last years writing to his granddaughter, the one he believed would change everything. He held up the real will, his voice low and firm. Before you sign anything, Clara, you should know why your grandfather trusted you so much. The pen slipped from my hand and clattered to the podium. Let me see, I said. My father snapped, his face red. You have no right. Security, take him out. 2 security guards stepped forward, but Henry held up the document. I advise you to think carefully, Richard. Obstructing the publication of a valid will, it's a felony. Now everyone in the room was a witness. The 2 security guards paused. The crowd began to whisper. Surely someone had pulled out a phone to record. My mother, Eleanor, tried to regain her composure, her voice as sweet as honey. Mr. Callahan, surely this can wait until Monday. This is a family party. A party where you force your daughter to sign away her inheritance, Henry replied, raising his eyebrows. How interesting, because there's nothing to give up. My father, Richard, roared, I'm the sole beneficiary of my father's estate. The will was read 10 years ago. Henry smiled calmly. A copy of the will was read, yes, but not the real one. The one you submitted was made after destroying the original, or at least, you thought you destroyed it. The entire ballroom gasped. Vivian clutched her father's hand, panicked. Dad, what is he saying? Henry turned to the crowd, his voice clear and calm. Walter Whitmore was a special man, and one thing was for sure. He was no fool. He knew his son well enough to keep several copies of the real will, sealed in different places. The air in the room became thick, and for the first time in his life, my father, Richard Whitmore, looked like a man about to lose everything. This will, Henry Callahan said, his voice soft and quiet, still silencing the room, is backed up, videotaped, stored in a steel safe, and legally witnessed. He turned to me, his eyes softening. Your grandfather knew both of his granddaughters, Clara, and he made appropriate preparations. My mother, Eleanor, began frantically tapping on the phone. Lawrence, yes, we need you to come to Easton Hall immediately. Bring the files. She paused when she noticed everyone was looking, forcing a smile. It's just formality. Henry tilted his head, his voice light as air. Call the lawyer? Good. He'll definitely want to see Clause 7. What's Clause 7? I asked, surprised by the calm in my voice. For the first time, Henry smiled, a genuine, warm smile. That's what your grandfather called the truth clause. The part that explains why he spent the last 10 years of his life watching both of his granddaughters from afar, recording every move, every choice. My father, Richard, suddenly lunged for the document, but Henry backed away surprisingly quickly for his age. Shall we read it together? Henry said calmly. Or do you want to tell it yourself, Richard, so everyone knows what you've been hiding? He opened the file. The pages, though old, were still intact. Henry's voice rang out clearly, each word like a hammer blow. This document was signed by Walter Whitmore on March 15, 2015, before 3 witnesses and a notary. It was then sent to my law firm with 2 other copies kept at 2 independent law firms for absolute safety. That can't be, my father said, but his voice had lost its usual authority. I manage your assets, Not anymore, Richard, Henry interrupted gently, because from this moment, everything has changed. Do it if you want, Henry Callahan said, his voice sharp. Your father anticipated this. That's why he left clear instructions about when and how to publish the real will. He turned to me, his gaze calm. He wanted to wait until both granddaughters revealed their true colors, And tonight, it seemed like the perfect time. Vivian smiled faintly. Even if there was another will, it would be invalid. Henry replied immediately, his voice firm. Miss Whitmore, with her law degree, would know that a more legitimate will would supersede the old one, especially if the first one had been altered for personal gain. My parents looked at each other, my mother's hand shaking. Walter Whitmore, Henry continued, spent the last 10 years of his life documenting the true contribution of his two granddaughters. Not degrees or money, but real impact. He pulled out a thick file, and the room fell silent. Clara, did you know your grandfather once hired a private investigator to follow your career? Henry Callahan asked, his voice soft but resonant. Not to spy, but to document everything your parents missed. Every award, every child you helped change, every family saved by your art therapy program. The room was completely silent. He had files on both of you, Henry said, looking between Vivian and me. And based on that, he decided who his true heir was. That's ridiculous, Vivian protested, her voice trembling. No, Henry replied, it's justice. Now let's read Article 7. Vivian immediately interjected, her voice as instructive as a lawyer's. I want to see the certificate of authenticity, notarization, timestamp. Henry smiled, pulling out a thick manila folder. Notarized at 3 locations, with the seal of the state of New York, verified last week. Witnesses include Judge Patricia Hornby, Dr. Michael Chen, and Eleanor Roosevelt III of the Manhattan Trust. Vivian checked each page, her face growing pale. These are real, Henry nodded. Of course. Your grandfather never lets anything go wrong, and he recorded it all. Sign it, Henry Callahan said, pulling an iPad from his briefcase. Or do you want to see your grandfather explain his decision? This is ridiculous, my father Richard shouted, his face red. Henry remained calm. He tried to force Clara to sign a waiver he knew she had. And yes, I waited, because Walter Whitmore predicted he would do exactly this. The crowd stirred. Someone whispered, better than Netflix. Vivian turned to her parents, her voice cracking. Dad, you knew there was another will, right? And you hid it? My mother, Eleanor, was silent. Her silence was the clearest answer. 10 years, Henry continued. They've known for 10 years. They found the first copy in Walter's desk and burned it. What they didn't know was that he submitted 3 more copies to 3 other law firms and videotaped the entire signing process. I object, Vivian said, trying to regain her composure. On what grounds? Henry asked. Improper influence or lack of mental capacity, she replied, her voice trembling. Henry adjusted his glasses, his voice sharp. The medical records show that Walter Whitmore was of perfectly normal mental capacity. There is no influence except the truth, and this will, ma'am, is inviolable. He turned to page 7, his eyes scanning the carefully typed text. Now, he said, let's discuss the inheritance standards that Walter Whitmore established. The room fell silent. And I knew the decisive moment had come. Sign it, Henry Callahan said, pulling an iPad from his briefcase. Or do you want to see your grandfather explain his decision? This is ridiculous, my father Richard shouted, his face red. Henry remained calm. He tried to force Clara to sign a waiver he knew she had. And yes, I waited, because Walter Whitmore predicted he would do exactly this. The crowd stirred. Someone whispered, better than Netflix. Vivian turned to her parents, her voice cracking. Dad, you knew there was another will, right? And you hid it? My mother, Eleanor, was silent. Her silence was the clearest answer. 10 years, Henry continued. They've known for 10 years. They found the first copy in Walter's desk and burned it. What they didn't know was that he submitted 3 more copies to 3 other law firms and videotaped the entire signing process. I object, Vivian said, trying to regain her composure. On what grounds? Henry asked. Improper influence or lack of mental capacity, she replied, her voice trembling. Henry adjusted his glasses, his voice sharp. The medical records show that Walter Whitmore was of perfectly normal mental capacity. There is no influence except the truth. And this will, ma'am, is inviolable. He turned to page 7, his eyes scanning the carefully typed text. "Now," he said, "let's discuss the inheritance standards that Walter Whitmore established." The room fell silent, and I knew the decisive moment had come. While everyone was celebrating Vivian's achievements, no one realized that Clara was quietly changing the lives of others. Henry Callahan said, pulling out a stack of papers. 237 letters from independently verified families, noting that she changed their children's futures. 14 children who were once unable to speak now communicate through painting. 3 suicides prevented because of her. I choked up, tears streaming down my cheeks. I didn't know. He knew everything. Her grandfather called her the silent servant. He saw what others missed. He opened another folder, filled with photos and thank you notes. He didn't hire a detective to spy, but to record what your parents deliberately didn't see. Did you know that the Riversend Mayor's office has your picture in the Unsung Heroes section? 3 years ago, when the school cut funding, you used all your savings to maintain the art program. You taught extra classes at night to buy school supplies. It was all recorded. A woman's voice rang out from the crowd. "That's my daughter's teacher," a parent, crying. "My daughter didn't speak for 2 years because of selective mutism. Miss Clara taught her to draw out her words. Now she talks non-stop. She saved my daughter." The room was silent. The parent turned to my parents, her voice trembling but firm. "Have you ever really seen your daughter?" Then the man in the blue suit added, "She taught my daughter to draw when she lost her hearing. Art without sound." Another parent burst into tears. "My son is autistic. She taught him for free. Now he's accepted into art school." Henry Callahan looked around the room. Everyone had seen it. Your grandfather, Walter Whitmore, saw something this family had never seen: kindness. He turned to Vivian, his voice calm. "Now, Ms. Whitmore, it's your turn." He flipped through the slim file. Magna cum laude from Harvard Law, $215,000 starting salary, 40 hours of mandatory community service, no other volunteering. Henry looked up. "And here's the last line in your grandfather's notes. A man after fame, not justice." Vivian was stunned. My parents bowed their heads. Henry continued reading the last part of the will. "My entire estate, the company, the estate, and the Whitmore Family Foundation, will be passed to my granddaughter, Clara Whitmore. For in a world full of people who want to be seen, she has chosen to be the light." I stood still. All the whispers, all the sarcasm faded away. Amid the crystal light, I heard my grandfather's words echo. "You will change the world, Clara, in ways they will never understand." I raised my head, my voice choked but steady. None of us are truly rich by what we have, but by what we give. And that night, in that opulent room where everything was once measured by status and money, the truth was given back to those who deserved it. After the final applause died down, the room slowly thinned out. The crystal glasses were left in the dim yellow light. My parents sat motionless in the front row. For the first time in their lives, they had nothing to say. Vivian stood near the window, her perfect makeup smudged by the light. I moved closer. There was no more anger, only a soft sadness and certainty. My father spoke first, his voice hoarse. "We were wrong, Clara. All these years, I only saw success in numbers and fame. As for you, you have created something that money can never buy." My mother took my hand, trembling. "You may not have to forgive me, but I am proud of you. I was too blind to see the light right in front of me." I smiled, tears streaming down my face. "I don't need an apology, Mom. I just need people to see me, really, for the first time." I turned to Vivian, who stood still, her eyes red. "I've won every competition, every title," I said softly, "but I've never had to fight to be heard." "I don't have to be like you, and you don't have to be like me." Vivian burst into tears. "Can you forgive me?" I nodded. "Of course. Family isn't about who's better, it's about who's brave enough to change." A week later, I was back in the Whitmore's penthouse, no longer the overlooked guest. I walked into the council room where my grandfather's legacy was kept. On the table was a picture of him, his eyes kind, his smile half proud, half trusting. I put my hand on my new plan. The Whitmore Foundation for Art and Education, an organization for disadvantaged children, where art becomes a voice for forgotten souls. When my father walked in, he no longer looked like a powerful businessman, but like a father finding himself. Do you need any help? I smiled. Yes, I need you to learn how to listen again. My mother served on the advisory board. Vivian handled legal matters for the foundation. For the first time, we were working together, not for fame, but for our family's true legacy, kindness. One afternoon, I stood by the window looking out at the city. It was pouring rain, the water droplets reflecting the light like countless brushstrokes on a giant canvas. I heard my grandfather's words echo in my heart. You will change the world, in your own way. I replied softly, as if to myself, and I am doing it, sir. If my story touched something in you today, take a moment, take a deep breath, and remember, you are not alone. Somewhere out there, someone is struggling to be seen. And maybe this story has reminded them, and you, that they are worthy. If you believe that everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are, please take a second to support this channel. Hit that like button. It really helps the story reach more hearts. Leave a comment. Let me know which part of this story touched you the most. And self-worth. Because every perspective, every word, every voice matters. Thank you for coming along on this journey.